So, hello and welcome everyone to the ReHousIn Lecture series. So, this is part of a project funded by the UE Horizon program that is called ReHousing, that stands for Reducing Housing Inequalities, and involves networks, as you can see here, of academic and institutional partners across 9 different countries in Europe. And that are working on the relations and trade-off in between environmental and energy initiatives and housing inequalities. So today, this lecture and the lecture series is hosted by a bachelor course entitled Cities Prepare the World, as some of you already know, and that is coordinated by Marco Krematsky and myself. And we are very happy to have this joint session with a class of international students here at Sciences Po and online students from TU Wien. So just to let you know and to give you a little bit more of information about the research project, it seeks to foster innovative policy solutions for inclusive and high quality housing by examining the production and the reproduction of housing inequalities in relation to green initiatives. So about the research approach, it is based on engaging not only researchers, but also policymakers and local stakeholders through different means, workshop, webinars, and collaborative labs. So as you can see from the map, there are 9 countries involved in the project across 4 European regions, and every country works on 3 different types of case studies, including a metropolitan region, a medium-sized city, and a rural area, for a total of 27 different case studies. So the French team is based at the center, the research center. The Research Center of European Studies and Comparative Politics at Sciences Po. And it is composed by Marco Krematsky as main principal investigator, Tommaso Vitale, Antoine Guironnet, and myself. So just to give you some information about myself, I have a background in urban planning and a PhD in urban and regional development, and I'm a researcher here at TU and conducting teaching activities here at Sciences Po and at the University Gustave Eiffel in Paris. And I will let Antoine present himself for moving on.
Hi everyone, I'm Antoine Guironnet. I'm a postdoc researcher at CE as well. I am an urban political economist. I have a background as well in urban planning and politics. I've worked extensively on the rising power of financial actors in real estate, office markets, but also housing. So big global corporate landlords like Blackstone, which you may have heard from. I've also worked on the largest real estate fair in the world, and now I'm more closely involved in this project, looking at housing and environmental transition and the interaction between the two.
So thank you very much. And so just to let you know the way we worked and the way the all different partners worked. So at the very beginning, we mainly focused on a national level, and we investigated many different factors, such as trends in inequalities and access to housing. And this very first part of the work was based on data collection from different databases, including Eurostat and also the National Statistical Institute, ANSE. And then we focused on the evolution over time of environmental and energy policies in France. And parallel to this, we also investigated the national housing system and the welfare regime and the evolution over time. So this very first part of the project at the national level allowed us to formulate some hypotheses about the possible relationship between environmental and energy initiatives and housing inequalities in France. And then, thanks to this first hypothesis, we moved to the local scale to investigate how these relations and trade-off might take shape in different ways in different territorial contexts, including a capital city that is Paris, a mid-sized city, and a rural area. So today, we are focusing on the case of France, and more specifically, we will be sharing some insights into the Parisian case studies. So the title of this lecture is, as you can see, Unpacking Energy Retrofitting and Housing Inequalities. So it will be focused on housing retrofitting. And the idea is that the possible mechanisms that might explain the relation between housing inequalities and retrofitting can include governance dynamics, variation in approach and resources between private and social rental housing, and overall neighborhood change linked to surrounding urban transformation. So before jumping to the case study presentation, I'd like to clarify what do we mean by housing inequalities. And according to the ReHousIn Research Project, this is conceived as a multidimensional concept, including, for example, the relation between the total housing expenses and the housing budgets. It's what we could define as housing affordability, but it also refers to what we define as housing segmentation, referring to the share of different tenures, so ownership, social rental, and private rental, and specifically the share of social housing and public housing. Then a third dimension could refer more generally to housing inequality that refer to the access to basic amenities, such as running water, for example. And finally, a fourth dimension can be related to housing consumption that is often referred to the usable floor space per capita ratio. So this is just to clarify the meaning of what do we mean by housing inequalities, and according to the research project. But also, what do we mean by housing retrofitting? And of course, when we refer to housing retrofitting, it involves not only interventions on the building envelope, but also some interventions, some internal interventions that affect the heating system or the cooling system. And so what is interesting is that we are considering housing retrofitting intervention applied to different housing tenures, so owner-occupied, private rental, and social rental. And what we are trying to understand here is the relation of these kind of interventions with housing issues, and we can identify a number of both opportunities and risks related to these kind of interventions. So what do we mean? On the one hand, and just to give you a few examples, housing retrofitting interventions might help reduce household energy costs and mitigate what we call as energy poverty. That is a situation where households struggle to afford heating, cooling for their homes, for their daily needs, but also there might be an improvement of comfort as well as a contribution to ecological transition and emission reduction, but also can be part of integrated and urban policies and that also involved urban regeneration. Then from the other side, we can also identify a number of risks and more generally, this kind of intervention can exacerbate existing inequalities or create new ones. So just to give you a few examples, among the risks, we might have unequal distributions of costs between tenants and owners, a risk of displacement due to a rent increase after renovation, and also some complex fragmented governance that might somehow impact negatively the results of housing retrofitting intervention. As I said, those are just few examples, and we can maybe discuss a little bit more about that. And the main hypothesis of the research project is that to answer this question, so what's the relation between environmental and housing issues? We need context-based investigations and the factors that might shape this relation can include socioeconomic conditions, housing system and welfare regimes across different countries, but also how environmental and energy policies emerged and evolved over time, and what are local conditions also in terms of political priority and decision making. So we will start today by giving you an overview of the context and the housing policies in Paris, then moving on to greening and housing retrofitting policies, and finally focusing on the case study of Orc de Flandre. So as you already know, because I already showed this map to students last week, Paris has around 2 million inhabitants, while if you look at the Métropole du Grand Paris, it will be more about 7 million. So what is interesting to know is that population density in the city center is about 21,000 inhabitants per square kilometers. That is one of the densest city in Europe. And at the same time, so in terms of population building density, so the city's dense built environment make it one of the deadliest cities in Europe due to urban heating highly. So if we look at the evolution over time of population, we can see that the population in the greater Paris continues to grow. That's the orange color, while the municipality of Paris has been experiencing a slight but steady decline. So according to this study, there are many different reasons that might explain this evolution of population over time, such as the presence of, in the city of Paris, of more vacant and secondary homes, but also some demographic factors, and the fact that is very much related to demographic factors is the fact of having smaller households, so that the average number of people per dwelling is somehow smaller than before, and also some housing market dynamics that might somehow explain this population evolution over time. So as you can see from this table, Paris is a city of renters. So while owner occupation remains relatively low, especially when we compare to the national average. Most residents live in rental housing, both private housing and social housing. So notably, social housing has increased significantly since 2001, reflecting municipal policies promoted by the left-wing majority in the city council. So what you have to know is that Paris has a peculiar institutional setting. In fact, it is both a municipality, that's something you can see in the map with the red color, and a department, allowing a concentration of, as I said here, both technical and financial resources within a single authority. So this aspect combines, meaning that the city of Paris combines competencies that are elsewhere in France, fragmented between different tiers of government. So this means that the city is responsible for housing, urban planning, and climate policies, and it defines its own urban plan and climate plan. That is applied within the municipal boundaries, that once again is the limit, the area that you can see in red in the map. So Paris has been governed by a center-left mayor with a left-wing majority in the city council for over 2 decades. And more recently confirmed with the last elections. And in this context, housing has been a key policy priority, particularly in the name of social mix, meaning that the aim of maintaining a balanced population across different socioeconomic groups, and especially preserving access to housing for the middle class. Despite the rise in prices. So at the same time, housing prices in Paris have increased significantly. The price of owner-occupied apartment has multiplied by 2.5 over the past 20 years, while rent increased by around 76% between 1999 and 2014. So what we can see is that, as I said, as I mentioned, we can see a significant increase of social housing thanks to different aspects. For example, political priority, as we just mentioned, but also strong organizational resources that is very much related to the fact that Paris has a capital status, and it does have institutional specificities. But also, this was also thanks to land partial availability, meaning and referring to large-scale regeneration projects on brownfield land with significant share of social housing that was asked by the municipality itself, and it also includes state-owned land. So the conversation, and parallel to this, so parallel to large-scale regeneration projects, the city was able to produce, to increase social housing thanks to the conversion of existing stock, using mainly zoning instrument and major municipal investments. So this is just to let you know that despite the efforts to promote a more balanced distribution, and as you might already know, the bulk of social housing remains concentrated in the eastern neighborhoods due to historical location and land availability for what I've just mentioned, the large-scale regeneration project. And also, some critiques emerged with referring to the imbalance between the type of social housing produced and the real needs of the local population. In fact, in France, and currently, there are 3 tiers of rent ceiling that correspond to different type of financing condition and level of rents, from lower, as you can see here, to upper. There are 3 different levels. So basically, the darker color correspond to to the lower tier, and so you can see the production, the kind of social housing that has been actually produced over time. And
can I just jump?
Yes,
So that means this is very important. That means when you heard social housing, you have always has to ask yourself, at least in France, yeah, but for who, like what type of social housing and which renter what type of renters can access social housing? So basically, speaking of the 3 tiers, so the lower tier, as you may have understood, is for the poorest people. And then as we move from one tier to the other, the last tier, PLS, Prérogative Sociale, is for the middle class. So that's one thing to build social housing, but the other and the most important issue is what kind of population will have access to this housing. And one of the critiques against the social mix agenda of the city of Paris was that first, like it didn't reverse the geographical imbalance, as we've seen, between traditionally, let's say, the rich West versus North and East. And also that a lot of this new social housing included social housing for the middle class, so not for the poorest people, whereas there is a lot of low-income poor people who have applied to social housing. So there is sort of a mismatch between the demand for social housing and the type of social housing which is effectively produced and forms the supply in Paris.
So thank you very much. And if we go back to if we go to the private rental sector, as you might have heard, Paris has been a pioneer in rent control policies that was firstly introduced in 2014 and then reintroduced and extended until 2026. However, its effects have been relatively slow. Rents still increased by about 4.2% between 2019 and 2023, suggesting only moderate impact. Moreover, around a quarter of rents remain above legal limits, raising question about the overall effectiveness of this measure. And when we go to the rental, when we refer to the renter supply, we can also see that there is a shrinking rental supply, and this is due to different reasons. Once again, so first of all, the increase in the short-term rent, that is mainly Airbnb, but not only. And so, as a response to this phenomenon, the municipality worked a lot, including and involving new regulation, enforcement, and legal action, as well as doing some national and European lobbying. At the same time, the shrinking rented supply can be also explained with an increasing concentration of ownership and sorry. With an increasing concentration of ownership, and that there might be some factors possibly explaining this shrinking rental supply, and we can go back to this later on. So just to move and to move forward the case studies, the basic question is to what extent and how experimental and, more generally speaking, climate issues have been integrated into housing and urban policies in Paris. And as you might know, there is now in force a new bioclimatic urban plan that came into force in 2025 and was a key commitment of Anne Hidalgo's second term. And starting from some basic elements. So basically, Paris, as we already mentioned, was already a densely built city, and major recent development projects, so the urban regeneration project we mentioned before, were mostly completed. So there was a need for an urban planning kind of shift and the need to integrate climate change consideration into our urban planning. And this was based on the previous 2006 urban plan and the revision of 2016 that asked for a stronger link with the local climate plan. And so what is interesting is that there is you can find the focus of this bioclimatic plan. There are many aspects, but what we are focusing here is that there is this focus on the existing environment and working on how we can adapt the existing building environment to the climate change. And so how to do that? The bioclimatic urban plan requires the integration of energy savings measures every time some works on existing buildings are carried out. So just to go to housing retrofitting and then move forward to the case studies we're going to focus on. In Paris, more than half of main homes, so first residences, are in the least energy efficient categories, which is much higher when compared to the regional and the national averages. So most of these inefficient homes are private, about 58%, and they tend to be concentrated in specific areas in the city, and more specifically in central and northeastern neighborhoods. So in 2021, there was a national law that started gradually banning the rentals of the least energy efficient homes. And since then, the rental market, both private and social, has been undergoing increasing pressure, even if some exceptions are allowed under this law. So finally, some households we should focus also on some households that might be more vulnerable when compared to others in the city. In fact, small scale owners in northern districts, such as the 90th or the 80th, face high retrofit costs compared to their incomes. So the city adopted several climate plans since 2007, which included growing targets in terms of reduction of energy consumption and housing retrofit. And in 2024, the latest plan was adopted, setting a target of 5,000 social housing, of retrofitting 5,000 social housing units per year, and 40,000 private units per year by 2030. And so this is the very last slide about housing retrofitting policies at the urban scale before going into the analysis of the neighborhood case study. And so to achieve these objectives, these targets defined within the urban and the climate plan, several programs have followed one another, representing long-term public action to encourage retrofitting. So initially, as you can see from the map, these efforts were focused on specific areas of the city. So, and you can see that in green, in red, and in light blue. Targeting specific areas of the city and private housing. Later on, the municipality launched a series of citywide programs, so more diffused everywhere across different neighborhoods, under the name of this École Innovant Paris. And these programs mainly targeted private housing stock and also owned properties, providing both technical and financial support through a municipal agency, and including subsidies that are distributed both by the city, so from the nation, from the local level, and by the national agency, so from the national level. And so the programs have two focuses. As I mentioned, priority is given to property owners. And over time, and what is interesting to know is that some additional social criteria have been introduced. For example, additional social, according to the last version of the program, social subsidies are available for modest owners occupier or for properties that are located in the most deprived neighborhoods in the city. So after having gave you some insights about the context, housing policies, and greening and housing retrofitting policies in Paris, we can now move forward to the specific case studies of Orléans and Sens, and I will let Antoine present it.
Thanks, Federica. I can take it from now on. So that was already, I guess, a lot for you to get your hands on, and hopefully, perhaps it was also a bit abstract because you're no expert in housing issues or retrofitting, which might be a bit technical. But I hope that you have already got some idea of the social issues which are at play. So, and if I were to sum up the kind of social issues we're dealing with, is basically that, yes, it's good and there is a need to have greener cities, but who's going to be able to live in these cities? This is basically the core question you need to ask yourself, and that we're looking at in this research and in these specific lectures. Who decides who lives in cities and in greener cities, if they are greener, and who can access greener housing? Because as you may have understood, housing retrofit costs a lot of money because we have to upgrade the building envelope, we have to upgrade technicalities, systems, and so on and so forth. And so some of the landlords, they might be tempted to say, hey, but I've invested in housing to have some rents every month in my pocket. So, okay, I can invest. So the living conditions for the renters are better. But I also need to recoup my investment. So why wouldn't I, for example, increase the rents? So, or if I'm an owner-occupier, which means that I own the flat I'm living in, I may have inherited this flat, but I'm a blue-collar worker. I don't have much money, and all of a sudden, the whole condominium has agreed to move towards housing retrofit. And so I have to pay. But how am I going to make ends meet if besides the money I owe to the bank, or besides the different expenses I have over each month, I have to pay thousands of euros to upgrade this building. So for owner occupiers, the risk might also be that they have to live, basically. They have to live where they live. And also, please bear in mind that the issue of living the flat is also that a flat is not just a home, it's also a social network, it's your neighborhoods, it's the type of neighbor, the amenities you may access. So that's, I mean, we're talking about big issues here. And having said that, I'm going to take you in a place which is located in the northeastern part of Paris, which is the Orgue de Flandre. You may have, I need to click here. And this is what I wanted to show. So you may have already seen this or not. Who's ever seen this picture or this building or ever been there? Okay, not many people. So this is a very iconic 70s residential complex in the northeastern part of Paris. So it's called the Orgue de Flandre. And we've done a case study on that, looking at two things. So basically there is a city-led major urban redevelopment initiative that combines housing retrofitting and nature-based solutions. By nature-based solution, I mean, for example, greening streets, increasing the size of the existing garden, green roofs and whatnot. So I won't be talking about this part of the project, as you may have guessed, because I'm going to focus on housing retrofitting, as it's already a lot to cover. So we've been, Federica and I, conducting case study research in this neighborhood. This is an ongoing research, small disclaimer. So we still have some work to do. Just to give, so please bear with us. And that's also, I think, an opportunity to see how in social science research we work and we grapple and we struggle with the complexity of the world, but that's also what makes it very interesting. So just to give you a sense of where I'm talking from, so we've done a couple of semi-directed interviews with major actors, so institutional actors such as various departments and elected officials of the city, a social housing provider, as well as residents and some experts like consultants who are giving technical expertise for residents or for the city of Paris. We've also done a great deal of desk research, so collecting and analyzing the decisions that were voted by the Council of the City of Paris, which is in itself a whole bunch of work, but also going over the minutes of public meetings and looking at the official planning documentation. And last but not least, we've used some existing academic literature on social spatial change in this district. However, there is not much, and this is also what makes it interesting, because we can hopefully say new things, or at least things that haven't been said about this specific area. So going back to some history. So we're here in red. This is a master plan, a very old one from the late 50s, which indicated the îlot insalubre, so like the poor condition housing that was to be demolished in order to build new housing by the late 60s. And as you can see, the org was built on one of these poor housing areas, which is the îlot Riquet. So basically in the 70s, they've just bulldozed the îlot Riquet. And on these 6.5 hectares, they built this iconic residential complex in the 70s. The complex is made of 2,000 apartments. What makes it also very, very interesting as a case study in relationship to what Federica has said is that we have a diversity of tenures within the same complex. So tenures, again, just to go over this again, when we speak of housing, there are many types of housing. You can either own your own housing, in which case we speak about owner-occupied housing, but you may also rent your housing, and in which case there are different types of landlords. There are social housing providers, in which case we talk about social rental, SR, or social housing, but your landlord may also be either a mom-and-pop landlord or a global corporate investment fund, in which case we talk about PR as private rental. So it's very interesting to study this case, because in the same, it's not a tiny area, but you get the idea that it's the same residential complex. We have a diversity of tenures, which means that we have a diversity of social relationships and a diversity of economic logics, a diversity of actors. In the complex as well, they built not only housing, but hopefully and thankfully public facilities to provide public services and amenities to the residents living in these 2,000 apartments. So schools, playground, swimming pool, a sports center. So that's just a picture of the former îlot Riquet. So that's the kind of housing that we were talking about. As you may see, it was very industrial. It was also linked to the La Villette area, which was the meatpacking district in Paris. So this is why you can read Abat en gros, which means the bulk sale of some part of meat, I guess. And so basically, as I was saying, they bulldozed the place and an architect. Well, first there was an architect, first architect, and they moved to another one, Martin Schulz, who basically came up with this very iconic and distinctive architecture that they have built over the years in the across the 70s. So this is if we fast forward to now, the contemporary situation is that in 2018, the complex was home to almost 5,000 residents, a little more than 1,000 jobs. And as you can see from this picture taken from above, it has a very high built density. Here we're talking about more than 600 inhabitants per hectares. As a result, there are very pressing environmental issue because building density is a major factor of urban heat islands. What are urban heat islands? It's basically the idea that during the day, the built environment sucks up the heat and then gives back the heat during the night, so that although the air of the night might be cooler, it's not really, because then it gives you back the heat, and I'm sure that you've experienced that yourself, probably. And as you can see from this nighttime thermal imaging, the Hors-de-Flandre is also experiencing some urban heat island, although mostly on the edges, on the streets, not so much in the central garden, which is kind of logical because we know that trees and green spaces help to combat this phenomenon, and that's the purpose basically of installing green roofs and green spaces in green streets. So that's another map giving you some background about the area, which is basically here. And so that's, as you can see, first on the upper map, this is an area where mixing some green spaces, housing, which is, I don't know, they didn't put, but housing is in gray. You have some major transport infrastructure over there. You have the RER, for example, and other lines of regional transport. You have some economic activity over there, but also on the ground floor of the different housing buildings. This is also an area the map shouldn't be here, but whatever. This is also an area that is characterized, as you can see, by a very important presence of social housing. So all of these color blocks are social housing. The 19th district is one of the districts in Paris with the highest share of social housing. And then we'll bear in mind, of course, that this is social housing, but then we need to think about what kind of social housing. This is also an area, if we look at some of the issues that is facing very pressing social issues. First, there is the phenomenon of population aging. It's an area where a lot of the residents, more than a third, have lived there since 2 decades. Which implicitly means that there may be some turnover in the population due to mortality. Second of all, there are a lot of economic difficulties. If we take a number of indicators, the neighborhood doesn't fare very well compared to the 19th district or to Paris as a whole. For example, its poverty level is above that of the district or of Paris. That's the same of unemployment. Here you can see the increase in the number of job seekers. There's been some wage growth, but less than in the neighborhood and in the district and in Paris. So again, very pressing social issues with a part of the population experiencing dire living conditions. Last but not least, and the third point is that the area suffers from a bad reputation. First, due to youth violence between some different housing estates. So that there's been it's not anymore the case, but there's been a lot of youth violence and basically fights between youngsters from different housing estates, including those of the org. And also, in addition to that, it suffers from a bad reputation from drug consumption, especially from crack consumption. You have nearby Stalingrad, which has been nicknamed Stalin Crack, which is very famous because a lot of consumers, but that's been an ongoing issue since the 80s, a lot of consumers are hanging around Stalingrad because this is where the supply is. And at some point, they came closer to the Arc de Flandre because the city of Paris came up with the idea of, hey, why don't we open a public garden, a public park during night, and we put all of the crack consumers in this, and this is going to solve the issue. Guess what? It didn't. But that's again a third pressing social issue that I would like to bring to your attention. On the other hand, it's the complex is located in a district undergoing social spatial change that some authors, such as geographer Anne Clerval, has interpreted as gentrification. So you may have heard of gentrification already. In a nutshell, it's this social spatial process whereby blue-collar workers are being displaced by more affluent people, usually in the first place artists, and then more executives. So that's when you heard about gentrification, that's basically describing a form of social spatial change characterized by class-based displacement, and usually the main driver for that is the real estate markets. Basically, a place becomes more attractive for a number of reasons, and then the prices go up, and so the blue-collar workers who used to live there are being pushed out by a new form of population, a new type of population. And so Anne Clerval has worked extensively on that. She's produced a map of the front lines and hotspots of gentrification in Paris. This is a very controversial work, but nonetheless interesting. And as you can see, the Bassin de la Villette is here, and the Org is almost there. So we are on one of the front lines and hotspots of gentrification in Paris. In her book, in her 2013 books, she wrote that all the ingredients are in place to promote the gentrification of the older housing stock. She was speaking of the 19th district, while allowing public powers to claim an increase in the social mix to the detriment of working classes. So she's published other articles and this map, for example, on the Villette Bassin, and she has shown how there was a displacement of cultural and recreational hubs that was encouraged by public policy, and which may change the image of the neighborhood and of the area for people, and which may attract higher income people in the area and kickstart and slowly but surely kickstart this gentrification process. And again, the Org de Flandre is just nearby the Villette Bassin, where you had a bunch of new cultural facilities, the refurbishment of the Magasins Généraux, the extension of recreational happenings like Paris Plage, Nuit Blanche, and that's already a lot. If we move closer to the Org de Flandre, we can see also some social spatial change in the district, in the immediate vicinity. There's been the opening of green facilities, the Éole Park, where the city once put all the crack consumers in it. There was also the 104, which was opened, so it's city-owned cultural centers that used to be the municipal funeral home. And last but not least, nearby the org, you also have new housing developments, private and student housing, such as on the Curial Street. And as you can see from this picture, we are nearby the org, where because of the towers, we can see it from a different vantage points. We're seeing also slowly, but perhaps surely, this social spatial change when we zoom on the buildings in the orgs. For example, the share of executives have increased from 12 to 19% of the population living in the complex over just only a couple of years, as you can see, just over 5 years. Meanwhile, there's been a decrease of blue-collar workers and private condominiums, which are a part of the complex, because remember that there is also social housing, but part of the complex are a bunch of private condominiums, high towers. They are now, if we read the press, and for example, this real estate broker was interviewed in the press saying that they have became extremely popular and they sell like hotcakes. And he was citing, for example, the high income earners, lots of architects with a passion of buildings, professional would tear up the original plan, open up the kitchen, redesign the interior, blah, blah, blah. So, and that's an example of a kind of very fashionable interior that is developing in the private towers in the area. So on the one hand, we have economic issues and more largely social issues, and on the other hand, we have some sort of social spatial change. So the main question is where is the project gonna go, and how is it gonna address these different situations? How is it gonna try? Is it at all gonna try to balance these social issues with the social spatial change? Do policymakers even have this in their head? What are their motives and what have they done if we look at the complex? So that's, time is running, but that's an official, that's if you go on the city's website, that's the official homepage of the project. You can have a look at it later. Basically, it presents the project as a single and coherent initiative that was launched in 2017 under the Estate Regeneration Framework. That's a policy framework in France, the Nouveau Programme National de la Rénovation Urbaine. But actually, our research shows that it's a more patchwork-like and piecemeal approach, and it's more of a combination of different initiatives that were at some point put together by the city rather than a very coherent planning initiative. But I don't want to spend too much time on this. Just to give you some background. So there was a first phase, basically, during which there was a piecemeal approach, by which I mean that there wasn't an urban project by itself conducted by a single department in the city. It was more a piecemeal approach. Some social housing providers and some owner-occupiers already engaged in retrofits. And there was a local governance committee set up by the city of Paris, but it didn't deal so much with the built environment issues, less housing retrofit issues. It was more interested into day-to-day basic issues such as safety, such as cleanliness, things like this. And also, one city planner noted that during these different meetings of the committee, that she noted that residents seemed somewhat demoralized. They felt truly left behind, and they say, anyway, there is no point in doing a big project when what's needed is basically good upkeep. So the mood by that time was that first we need to fix the basic things, and then maybe we will do something bigger. This came during a second phase, during which the city basically got some money from the state and engaged in designing a master plan, which basically laid out different major orientations for the complex. To sum up, they did a lot of things, but the major decisions were that they basically should try to open up the complex because it was seen by some residents, but also by different actors who participated in the workshops, such as the police and the planners. It was seen as too close, so they needed to open it and to make it more attractive to passerbys and to residents of the neighborhood. And this is why, for example, this is how they justified the demolition of 12 housing units here to make this sort of walking path more to make it easier and make the area more welcoming. As they say, they did other things. They wanted to enlarge the existing garden, to redesign the garden. So they basically, I think the garden is not twice as big as it was before. And they also paid some attention to closure, what we call résidentialisation. So basically, around all the social housing blocks, they agreed with that social housing providers should basically gate the buildings to say improve safety and to make people feel more committed. And they basically, the idea is that if you transform social housing and you make it look like private housing by gating it, you're going to fix safety and you're going to fix, for example, cleanliness. So that remains to be seen. You have a lot of literature on that, which is critical, but that was the idea at least. That's just a small video that the planning agency made. They were very proud of, showing you how it was and how it will be, although it remains a bit abstract, I guess. But that's a three-dimensional view. And here you can see the garden in the middle that they have enlarged. In orange, you can see the gates around the social housing. So there is a school with the arrow. They basically turn the entrance. Anyway, that's just to give you a sense. There was then a third phase during which they made adjustments to the master plan. They did new workshop with residents, for example, on public space. What did they want for public space? What did they want as public facilities? What were their priority? They also try to address the issues for women navigating public space. So, for example, they've done walking tours with women residents by nighttime to try to integrate gender-based issues. And the city of Paris has also signed an agreement with the main social housing provider, which is Immobilier 3F, I3F, which is basically a private social housing provider. And when I say private, it means that it has a private status. It can make profit, but this profit is limited. The ability of the social housing provider to distribute dividends to its shareholder is capped. It's like 3 to 4% per year. So that's a, let's say, limited lucrative social housing provider. Meanwhile, there have also been some progress over the actual works of implementing energy retrofit in social and private housing. So now that we've seen the context, now that we've seen the major phases We have a better sense of where we are, of when things have happened. We can also look at what are the main targets and who is going to implement that. It's very important also when we talk about governance to get a good sense of actors mapping. So if we go back to the official documentation, the main objectives of the project as laid out by the City of Paris are twofold. One is to enhance the neighborhood's appeal and the pride of living here. And second, it's to reverse the trend of what they call deterioration of the site. And then this calls for implementing structural solutions, blah, 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 relating to cleanliness and safety. And also, as you can see, through the renovation of housing and public space, trying to draw on the site's green potential and the architectural quality of the buildings. And basically, the project, the City of Paris, at least claims or wants that it's designed to be ambitious and effective in terms of improving the areas. So who's doing what? This is a very simplified actor mapping of the project. So the project itself is managed by the City of Paris and by the Urban Planning Department, which coordinates the different city departments involved in the project. There are at least 5 or 7 of them. For example, the department that manages the green space, the department that manages the cleanliness of the site, the housing department, and so on and so forth. So basically, they all operate in conjunction and under the coordination of the urban planning departments. The major landowners, which are major actors when we speak about housing, there is the City of Paris, which basically all owns the public space as well as some public facilities like the crèche, the school, the sports center. Then come social housing providers. Some of them are public, they are city-owned actually. This is the case of ReHousIn, which owns one of the social housing buildings. And the major social housing provider in the area, as you can see, is in orange, and this is Inequality, which I just talked about. Then there are also private homeowners, which are grouped into 3 different buildings, 2 of them between these high-rises towers. Then we have funders, who basically that means actors who allocate monies to this project. There are a lot of them. If we just look at the main ones, we have national state agency, so the Agence nationale de la rénovation urbaine, which basically gives money for social housing and all these public spaces. We have the ANA, Agence nationale de l'habitat, which gives subsidies to private homeowners. Then we have the regional council, which also gave like 1 million euros, mostly focused on public space and facilities, I think. And last but not least, there is also the City of Paris, which is also giving a lot of subsidies, especially for housing retrofit. And as you can see, the City of Paris is very much a major actor in this project, as it features as a coordinator, a landowner, and a founder. So another actor that is was in the loop during the project was the residents, and the city made some effort to have them implicated and to have them committed, to try to listen to what they said, or at least to ask what they said, which doesn't mean that then their asks were taken into account. This is always the difference. You can listen to people, but you don't have always to take into account what they say. Anyhow, when I'm talking about residents, so some of them directly participated as individuals, and others participated as members of organizations related to various issues. Most importantly, local tenant unions, so what we call the amicales des locataires, which are supposed to represent the renters' interests, as well as condominiums associations. I'm not going to enter into details. There were a lot of ways, mainly 3 ways, that all these residents were invited to the table, let's say, from very from city-led governance tools like the local governance committee to grassroots initiatives, meaning that sometimes, and I will talk about it if I still have time, at some point, the residents jumped into the conversation because they felt like their asks precisely weren't being heard and weren't being taken into account enough by the city as well as by the social housing providers. And when we've done interviews, what was very interesting, so these are interviews excerpts, were that some of the stakeholders describe themselves as being very open to implicating the residents, but at the same time, as this person was saying, he or she believed that you can just ask residents, what do you want, and tell us what to do, because he thinks that he or she thinks that doing urban design and doing housing policy is something that requires some expertise, so that this person made suggestions to the residents. And on the other hand, some of these residents were try to be very vocal and try to build a coalition among local tenant unions. And so that's why they, for example, this person said that we were united. When we voiced our needs. We had to get our everyday expertise recognized, but they still feel like project managers ignore it. That their experience is recognized, but that sometimes that's not enough to really bring into life. So again, the difference between inviting someone to the table and they taking into account their interest. And so some of these residents were very keen in saying that they didn't just sit back and wait for this to happen, but they jumped into the conversation. Housing retrofit issues. This was a major point of the master plan, and this is a major point of the project. The idea is that the city of Paris, one of the issues that they identified is that there is an ongoing social degradation, meaning that the built environment is old, it's decaying, and residents are getting poorer and poorer. And in the face of this, the city wants to maintain the diversity of tenure in order to preserve the social mix. So here we see how this very broad objective citywide that Federica talked about is being implemented, or at least is being put as a target for this redevelopment initiative. If we look at some figures, just to give you a sense of the different energy retrofits that have been approved. So we're talking about more than 2,000. So that's basically almost 100%. That's 100%. I think almost all the buildings, except one, I think, will have undergone housing energy retrofit by the next couple of years. We're talking about a big chunk of money, 43 million of euros, and a big chunk of public money, because 42% of this cost is being covered by subsidies from the city of Paris. So here again, this is an illustration of the very, perhaps, what's great, but also what's very specific about Paris is that they have a lot of technical and fiscal resources, so they can distribute a lot of subsidies. The issue being then who's going to benefit from these subsidies. But that may be very specific compared to other cities in France because they are less rich, they have less fiscal resources, so they may not be able to commit that much and to help owners or renters to cover the costs of housing retrofit. So in the remaining time, I'm going to go tenure by tenure. First, I'm going to go over private housing. Then I'm going to talk a bit about social housing. And hopefully, if we still have time, I will conclude by some words of discussion. So if we focus on private housing, these are the three main private housing buildings that we can find in the complex. Two of them, the Contact and Fig Towers, have undergone or are undergoing housing retrofit works as we are speaking. The 30 Riquet Street has been left apart, left aside, so to speak. So if we look at these private housing towers, if we look at tenure again, these are mostly owner occupied. So these are people, there are people who live in these flats, that they own the flat. And see, if they engage in housing retrofit, if they and this has to go through a vote in the condominium association. If the condominium association approves, they have to pay. And so then that depends who's going to be able to pay for this, and then who's going to enjoy housing retrofits, which are supposed to decrease the cost of housing because, for example, there's going to be less energy loss. So your bills, your utility bills are going to go down. So that's usually one of the benefits. That's one that Federica cited. So that's one of the perks, I guess, of housing retrofit, or one of the pros, which is usually used to convince homeowners, is that your ongoing expenses, your utility expenses are going to go down. Yes, but first you have to pay a lot. You have to invest a lot. Perhaps you will have to take a new loan. You just finished paying your loan for the home. Now you need to take a new loan to cover for the retrofit investment cost. Who lives in these flats? It's a mixed bag, if I may, or a mixed population, socially speaking and ethnically speaking. But there is an increasing turnover, if you remember what I've just said about these units selling like hotcakes. So there are still a lot of first-time purchasers. So basically people who bought the flat in the 70s and who are still here, but who are like everyone else are going to die at some point. And so this is why also I'm thinking about the turnover, because it means that some flats are going to be on the market if they are not inherited, or if the people that inherit them don't want to live in them. Some Asian residents, especially the Chinese community, settled in this towers a lot in the 90s, and more recently middle and I should have said also upper class residents in the 2010s, as I just mentioned. Energy retrofit came as an issue. So why did they engage in energy retrofit? For various reasons. Just very briefly, the prefect of Paris, there were security concerns because these are high rises and there is a specific legislation for high rises. For example, you have to have a fireman 24/7 in the building. You have to have a whole technical system, very complex, which is costly and which was decaying. So the prefect of Paris almost issued a security notice, which would mean that people will not be able to live in the building anymore, but he didn't, but this was the threat. Then the residents were also looking at other social housing in the complex, because housing retrofitted first started in social housing, and they felt like, some of them felt like, hey, they are getting their towers be retrofitted, why don't we? And there was some sense also of some jealousy and some resentment that poor people that live in the social housing have better living condition than us as private homeowners. So we need somehow to keep up on track, but they also disagreed with some of the aesthetical and architectural choices that were made. They disliked basically the metal that and the colors that were being used. So they wanted to do the same, but not exactly the same in terms of aesthetics. And you also had link to the retrofit municipal programs that Federica talked about. You also have some incentives from the city of Paris, including subsidies, so financial incentives, with the city basically saying, look, we can help you. There is money to do so, but that money may not be here forever. So now is your shot. You can take it, and you'd better take it, because sooner or later there won't be any public money to help you. That's a picture of the ongoing retrofitting works on one of these two high rises. So for the city, this was an opportunity to make progress on its retrofit municipal program, but at the same time, as I was saying, for residents, but especially low-income homeowners, this was a big economic issue. It required a lot of money, a magnitude of investment. So this was a very sensitive and delicate issue for the city of Paris, which committed a lot in trying to convince residents that they should engage in housing retrofit, while making sure that the low-income residents are not being evicted. So they tried here not to have a trade-off between energy retrofit and the social issues. They tried to make this to have both sides of the same coin at the same time. And how did they do that? They basically, in a nutshell, strategically shifted the housing instruments, and they basically shifted this housing energy retrofit initiative within a larger and another policy program, which is focused on the remediation of substandard housing. This seems very technical. What you have to remember is that bottom line is that they did this because under this framework, they could give more public subsidies to the homeowners, and especially to low-income homeowners. So here, in order to try to have energy retrofitting at the same time as preventing the social impact and maintaining the social mix, they basically strategically maneuvered and shifted in order to unlock a larger amount of subsidies. Not only that the city will chip in, but also the state. And for this, they had to negotiate also with the state. But that's a detail we don't have to look into. So in our interviews, and if we look at the different resolutions adopted by the Council of Paris, the city is very adamant and keen, at least in words, in principle, in saying that precisely they want to prevent evictions, and that energy retrofits should benefit to the existing residents and should not fuel a turnover in population. That was what one interviewee was saying. This person was saying that one of the city's mission is to maintain social diversity, which is very much at stake for owner-occupiers, for the low-income owner-occupiers, by helping them to finance a larger share of the cost of works, so they are not forced to sell and leave their homes to live further away. So in practice, the city says, but we still are waiting for the numbers to triangulate this, because you can say some things in interviews, but then this is always good to compare with the actual numbers. But on paper, for some of the lower income people, the public subsidies will cover 100% of the costs. So that's a lot, and that tells us a lot about how the city of Paris is trying to commit to this, let's say, social approach of energy retrofit in private housing. They can also distribute additional subsidies for landlords, provided the landlords commit to certain rental housing. But this seems to have not been much used in the case of the org. And when we say that, when we asked about the consequences for private rental about this, they say that they may not be eviction because there is the rent control system. So the rent control system might help preventing the temptation of landlords to increase the rent in order to recoup their investment. However, as Federica mentioned, there are legal loopholes which allow landlords to bypass the rent controls. We can talk about this later in a Q&A if you want. And also the rent control system as of now is going to end this year, basically. Yeah, 2026. So there is a belief in the effectivity of the rent control system. On paper, it might be the solution. In practice, things are more complicated than that. And in practice, when we, during our research, some interviewees reported that despite this effort of the city, some residents, some owner-occupiers had to sell because of the cost, but it's not clear very what their motives were. Did they sell because of the cost, or did they want just not to deal with like 5 years of works, because these are a couple of years of works. This is a lot of disturbance. So some of them may have just sold just to avoid, you know, the works and just to move to a quieter place. We've also found evidence in the press that some of the older people had to sell. So this is the case of, for example, Jeanne and Josette, which have had to sell their flats under life annuity schemes, basically what we call a viager, because they can keep up with renovation costs. And besides, this journalist cited another example of a Chinese resident who had to move. So we still have to triangulate a little bit to have a more objective assessment of if this social approach has really worked or not. Speaking of social, if we move very quickly to social housing, so social housing forms the bulk of housing in the residential complex. 8 of the 10 buildings are owned by social housing organization, mostly, as I was saying, I3F, the limited for-profit social housing providers. Actually, social housing has to be unpacked because here we have actual social housing, so HLM, for the lower and the middle tier. But we also have a very specific, and I won't enter more the details, form of social housing, which is intermediate housing. Again, some details about who the households are. I'm not going to enter, but I'm going to, into the details, I'm going to just jump onto some of the conclusions, just saying that for social housing providers, this is a very pressing issue due to the legislation of 2021 that Federica pointed, which will, by 2034, impose a ban on the E-labels apartments. So if you have an E-label, meaning that basically you have a poor energy performance apartment, as a social housing provider, you cannot sell it anymore. So that means a big loss of revenues. And basically, if one apartment is like this, probably the whole building is like this. So, if we look at the org, almost half of the estates are in this situation. So that was a very pressing issue that was anticipated by some of the landlords like I3F. The city of Paris, again, provided key supports. They put a lot of subsidies into this, almost half of the total cost. They've also negotiated additional contribution from the state agency. And they also underwrote loans, because in order to make the investment, social housing providers are contracting long-term loans. And in exchange for underwriting the loans, which means that if the social housing provider defaults, the city of Paris will reimburse the loan. The city of Paris enjoy reservation rights, meaning that it will have a control over the allocation of this housing. So the idea is that I'm underwriting you the loan, but in exchange, I gain a control over a fraction of the apartments, and I am responsible for saying who's going to live in this apartment, not you, the social housing provider. Local tenant unions were the third and the last but not least actors. They've used a twofold way to negotiate. First, they've used legal obligation of consultation when a social housing provider undertakes energy retrofit. So they've used this framework to negotiate on a case-by-case basis, but also they jumped into the discussion. The CNL, which is the major local tenant union operating in the area, has launched a petition, for example, in 2018. They also wrote an official letter to the mayor of Paris, to the mayor of the district, as well as to the préfet de Paris, to the state representative in Paris, to say that their housing conditions, especially the built environment, the built envelope, the heating systems were decaying, and there was not enough attention paid into this. They found that the workshops were great, but that the workshops to design the master plan were mostly focusing on green spaces, green roofs, and that this issue of housing retrofit and the underlying living conditions were not taken into account enough according to them. And this is why they got together, they mobilized, they organized, and they tried to jump into the discussion in order to make their voices heard. In a nutshell, two main outcomes in terms of affordability. What are the consequences of the energy retrofits in the org? The major result is that the social housing providers have tried to share the cost of investment with tenants. Not so much by raising the rents. Anyhow, by the law, they cannot do so much. They can only increase by 5%, which is only something, which is already something, but they have not used this. Rather, they have used a very technical way of doing so, which is basically using energy saving sharing schemes. So they say that because thanks to the renovation, as a tenant, you will save 50 euros per year. And over this 50 euros, you will give me back 25 euros. So this is a way of sharing the cost. It's a way of sort of capturing the benefits, the monetary benefits of the housing retrofits in order to fund the initial investments. And we found that in 6 out of 8 buildings, they've used this scheme. However, what was very interesting is that it's not an issue for most stakeholders. The city of Paris has supported I3F in doing so. I3F, the main social housing provider, sees this as a key source of revenue in the face of declining state support, by which I mean direct subsidies for social housing. And for tenant unions, this is a bit paradoxical because they were very vocal about housing retrofit, but they were not so much interested into negotiating over these energy saving sharing schemes, maybe because they think that that this is not a lot of euros that I'm gonna give back, so it's not very important, but still it may be argued that this is nonetheless important because at the same time, in the past years, we've had a rise in energy prices, as you already know, due to the Russia-Ukraine war and other factors. And so for them, the savings at the end of the month have been getting thinner because they have to share with social housing providers. And at the same time, the energy is costing them more. Last but not least, housing conditions. Interestingly, a lot of residents have, some residents have cited examples showing that energy retrofits do not straightforwardly translate into better living conditions. For example, they cited several defects after the renovation works. So windows falling. So be assured they fall inside the building, not outside, but still. They also cited example that the housing retrofit had very counterproductive effects in energy consumption for some of them. For the earlier buildings, the one that were renovated the first, they had to use additional electric appliances. So that was basically that is basically impacting the utility bills. And they also, due to technicalities, explained to me that to access hot water, now that the building has been renovated, they have to turn on the faucet and wait for like 10 minutes. And so they say, okay, so I pay less by the end of the month, but still in terms of the liters of water, like all this water goes to waste. So that they think this is paradoxical. And for tenant union representative, this results from a cost-saving rationale that is driving social housing providers. So I already talked a lot about this. I suggest that we move on to questions.
Yes. So thank you. And for